I think all three of us can relate to this, that, we celebrate successes, but we stay focused on the bigger picture and the mission. We have to be happy about progress, but we also have to be relentless about continuing to stay focused on our mission of curing our diseases.
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. All right, everybody, here we go. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for listening. We have an incredible guest today. Dr. David Fajgenbaum is a real doctor, and he's also a rare disease patient, and he found a treatment for his own disease. And he just released a book. You may know his name from the Two Disabled Dudes podcast, episode 19. We interviewed Dr. Fajgenbaum, and he was one of our favorites, and he's back to talk about his new book, and we want to talk to him about some of his life philosophies that he wrote in the book. So Dr. Fajgenbaum, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor to be back on, and the feeling is very mutual. You guys are two of my favorites, so thank you so much for having me back on.
Awesome. I gotta say, David, we've had the privilege to honor or to interview a handful of really amazing people, but I'm not playing favorites, so no offense to others, but man, you have been one of the best and one of the coolest interviews we've done, or personally, you're one of my favorite episodes so far, and your first episode was like 70 some odd episodes ago.
Yeah, that's crazy. July 2017 or something?
Yeah.
I think that's right. Oh my gosh.
We've come a long ways, and we know that you've had a lot going on in the last 2 years, or 2 and some odd months. But before we dig into where you're at now and catch up with what you've got going on, I do want to tell our listeners a little story. I had the privilege finally to meet David just about a month ago, or a little more, in San Diego. We were both involved all of us were involved at the 2019 Rare Patient Advocacy Summit hosted by Global Genes in San Diego. And at one point, I'm upstairs, we had club level access at this beautiful hotel. And David, I'm sure you automatically got it. Kyle and I kind of had to finagle our way in there, but we won't talk about that. Anyway, we're up there, and I went up there probably several times a day because of the cappuccino machine. And at one morning, I see David walk in, and I've got to tell everybody, David, you made my day. Like, I was walking on cloud 9 all day because, David, I know who you are. And we've only talked on the phone, but I'm pretty sure you said my name first. Like, before I was like, hey, David,
yeah,
Sean.
Absolutely.
You were like, Sean. Like, you knew me. And, man, that made my day. Like, oh, my gosh, this guy knows who I am.
I do, and I'm a huge fan of you guys. And that made my day to see you guys up there. To see you first and then see Kyle later on. That made my day.
And, of course, about 10 minutes later, I total fanboyed it, went and got my book, and was like, David, sign this.
Good stuff. I love it. And how about that view out that club level? Holy cow, that was pretty awesome.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Cool.
San Diego is so beautiful. After I left, I was like, how do we not all live in San Diego? I don't understand why we don't every single one of us live in San Diego.
Yeah. So as we get going here, tell us what has gone on the last 2 years. If you could do it in, briefly, catch our listeners up about David Fajgenbaum and maybe just a little bit about the CDCN, where you're at now.
Sure.
Last time you talked about the treatment that you discovered and how it was possibly applying to a few other patients and, maybe more people than just you, and just kind of where you're at now.
Sure. So, yeah, exactly. When we chatted in 2017, at that stage, I guess I'd been in remission for about 3 years on this drug, sirolimus, that was initially developed for kidney transplantation, and I was using to treat my Castleman disease, and was obviously so thankful for the being in remission for that period of time, 3 years. And we also, as you're saying, we are also beginning to think about how can what's helping me apply to other Castleman disease patients. So we'd run a number of experiments on other patient samples, similar ones that we'd run on my own samples to initially identify this drug for me. And those experiments were showing some really promising results. And as a result, at that stage, I think we'd maybe given it to one other patient or maybe a couple other patients. Now we've actually started an official clinical trial just 3 weeks ago. We enrolled our first patient officially into the trial on this past Monday, which is really exciting. So now we're doing this in a formal way. But before we started the official trial, we also gave the drug to about 10 other Castleman disease patients. Unfortunately, when you don't have clinical trials to support use of a drug, it's obviously there are good reasons for why the drug hasn't been more widely used. So it's been given to about 10 patients. It's worked in about half of those patients. The half that it did not work in, this is a disease called Castleman disease, where your immune system gets out of control and attacks your vital organs. And unfortunately for the patients where the drug did not work, there were no other options. And so we are continually reminded that we need to continue to advance research. And though this drug that saved my life helps me, it helps some other patients, it doesn't help all patients. And so we are both, I think all three of us can relate to this, that, we celebrate successes, but we stay focused on the bigger picture and the mission. We have to be happy about progress, but we also have to be relentless about continuing to stay focused on our mission of curing our diseases. So we've fortunately made progress on the scientific side of things. We've also made progress on the organizational side of things. When we chatted in 2017, I talked a lot about what we call the collaborative network approach, which is basically what we describe as the way that we do research through the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, rather than raising money and then inviting researchers to use the money how they think it should be used, kind of hoping for the right researcher to apply for the right project at the right time. We take a very focused and collaborative approach where we build a community, we let the community prioritize what should be done, and then we go out and we proactively recruit the right researchers to do our studies. And so what was exciting is back in 2017, we were seeing the fruits of our labor. We were seeing progress for Castleman disease, and we were beginning to think, how could we spread this to other rare diseases? And right around that time, I guess closer to 2018, we connected with leadership of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, who really saw our approach as a potential model for other rare diseases. And so we've been partnering with CZI, who has recently begun to focus on the rare disease community to try to expand our approach, this collaborative network approach, to other rare diseases. And then I guess the third update I would give is that I wrote a book, just as you mentioned at the end of the show, called Chasing My Cure, and it's all about my journey chasing after a cure for Castleman disease. I really wrote the book for three reasons. One is that I learned a lot about life and a lot about living from nearly dying 5 times, lessons that I wish I didn't have to go through all I went through to learn, and lessons that I want to share with the world. So that was really my main reason. Secondly, I want to raise awareness about Castleman disease and awareness about the rare disease community, what all of us are facing as rare disease patients, and opportunities to improve the speed that we pursue cures. And lastly, to highlight how drugs like the one I'm on, sirolimus, that are developed for one disease may actually be effective treatments for many other diseases, and how we need to really we need to develop new drugs, but we also need to think about the drugs that already exist for one disease that might be treatments for other diseases. And so for me, I'm just kind of full speed running after all three areas. So I run a research lab at the University of Pennsylvania where we're pursuing Castleman disease and related immune system disorders. I run the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network where we keep pushing on Castleman disease, but we also are now thinking about ways to help other rare diseases. And then lastly, I've been trying to spread the word about Chasing My Cure. And I've shared this with both of you guys, but the book's titled Chasing My Cure, but really it's about chasing our cures, and plural cures. It's about how do we take what we've learned from my experience, apply it to others, and also remembering that, yes, I've been in remission for 5.5 years, but I don't know how long the struggle worked for. And unfortunately, it doesn't work for all Castleman disease patients. So trying to maintain a laser focus on Castleman disease as well. How did I do getting it all into a couple minutes, Kyle?
Oh, that
That
good.
was perfect, man. That's a lot of stuff. You just cut us up for like 2 years in like 5 minutes. So that was perfect.
Thank you.
So, before we get into everything, some of the principles that you put in the book, I wanted to kind of set the stage. I think the book does an absolutely great job of outlining all the details of how you almost died. I think you can say that you almost died, but until you read about all the details and like the actual what actually happened, like it doesn't become as real. So I mean, just I guess talk about briefly, set the stage with like you literally were like probably a couple days away from death, like several times. What in the world?
Yeah. Yeah, this disease, idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, is so frightening because it can come out of nowhere and can affect individuals of all ages. And so for me, I was healthy and 25 years old, and then within a matter of weeks, I was literally dying in the intensive care unit at the same hospital that I'd been treating patients at. And you're right, Kyle. It was so scary each of those 5 times. The first time there was no diagnosis, and so the doctors didn't think I would survive. They encouraged my family to say goodbye. I actually had extended family travel to Philadelphia, so I could say goodbye to them. I had my closest friends travel in to say goodbye, and that was so frightening. We didn't know what it was that I was diagnosed with, or what the disease was, but we knew I wasn't going to make it. And with that first time, I remember spending a lot of time thinking about my life and about what I had done, what I hadn't done, and I started regretting a lot of things in my life. My brain function wasn't working perfectly well because my kidneys and my liver were failing. So my brain function was probably not 100%, but I do have some memories, and I remember having this kind of like really clear feeling of regret. And the things that I regretted, as I look back on it, none of the things I regretted were things that I had done or things I had said. They were only things that I had not done or had not said, things I hadn't told to people I loved, things that I wouldn't get to do and that I now knew I would never get to do. Those were the things that really were the hardest for me to cope with. And so that was kind of one of the first major lessons I got from my journey chasing my cure, and that was that I at least regretted things that I hadn't done or hadn't said to the people I loved. And so I kind of promised myself when I started to get better that if I got better, if I survived, I would live with this motto of think it, do it. And if I thought about doing something, and if it's the right thing to do, then I would go about doing it. But you're exactly right, Kyle. There's so many experiences over these last, it's now been 9 years since I first got sick, where you're right. When you say I almost died 5 times, you may think that like each of those 5 times I was like, oh, I'm going to get through it, and like this is just a blip in the radar. But each one was like, okay, this is it. And and it wasn't just me or my family saying that way. It was the doctors saying that. And I think that I hope it came across through the book, and I hope it helps I hope other people can read about it and learn kind of nuggets from it without having to get that close.
Yeah. I think I like the picture you painted in the book, and I'll admit I haven't completed the book, but I have read quite a bit, and I remember there's one particular section sort of early on where you're talking about being on your deathbed and chemotherapy kind of being the atomic bomb in some respects. Your body can only handle that so many times. So sure, like you said, maybe the first or second time you think, okay, I'm going to get through this, it'll be like last time, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I imagine come that third or fourth or even that fifth time where you know, shoot, the chemo is going to do just as much damage as the disease itself, if not even more. I can only imagine the thought process being, there's no way my body is going to get through this.
You're exactly right. And with each time, you kind of lose a little bit of, I don't know how exactly to describe it, but at least for me, it was kind of like I didn't have as much, I don't know, I lost like a little bit of like my relentless fight with kind of each of the 5 times. I think that it's just like only human nature to like start getting like fatigued and frustrated and disappointed with kind of each setback. And fortunately I had amazing family and friends that were supporting me and encouraging me. But yeah, I mean, I feel like with each one of those, it was like objectively, oh my gosh, I'm getting closer to my lifetime max of chemotherapy. But it was also just emotionally like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening again. You know, I'm taking all the right drugs that all of my doctors are telling me to take. I've tried everything. I've done everything, and they're still not working. And just how frustrating that can be. And like I said, thankfully, I had amazing family and friends, and I think that you guys can really relate to that. How important it is that when we are really down, when we are really having a hard time, that we have those people we can lean on.
Yeah. So you talk about all these times, and you just felt like you were getting beat down, and you were getting tired and more tired. I feel like there was a turning point in the book where you're like, all right, I'm not going to take this anymore. Like, I'm going to start fighting back, you know, and you talked about think it, do it. You know, you're thinking about all this stuff you could do, but then actually putting it into action.
Yeah.
What was that turning point, and how did that happen in your head and in your heart?
Yeah. So for me, that turning point came the 4th time I almost died. And you might be like, wow, how come it took so many times? And I think that those first 3 times, I really believed that like the medical community was just going to figure it out without me. And that like, you know, there must be people out there who are going to figure this thing out. They're brilliant scientists and doctors. They're all working on it. You know, what could I actually do? And so up until number 4, and then for me, with number 4, that's when I relapsed on the only drug in development. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even figure it out. I asked my doctor, I was like, you know, what else is going on? What other treatments are coming down the pipeline? What's promising that could help me? And he basically told me there's nothing else. And even though he didn't say it in these exact words, it was basically, you have no reason to be hopeful. And so all of a sudden, I felt completely alone. I went from feeling like there's this whole interconnected community of physicians and researchers all over the world that must be making progress to all of a sudden realizing actually that was just kind of a figment of my imagination, that I just imagined that there were people out there figuring out things. And there are people out there doing work, but the work had not resulted in any sort of meaningful progress. And so for me, that was incredibly sobering. As a medical student, I was very optimistic and maybe even naive, thinking that like everything was, you know, being done, that there must be treatments for everything. And if there weren't treatments yet, then there was going to be, you know, there were going to be treatments soon. And so it was really tough for me to deal with that. But just as you said, Kyle, there wasn't really, at that stage, there wasn't much time to be too down. It was like, oh my gosh, like if I want to have a future, I need to do everything I can to create that future by getting involved in research the way that you guys have raised awareness and funds, you know, realizing like it's time. And I think that something I mentioned in the book, which I think is a really good kind of analogy, and I think it can help the reader to really feel like they're there with me, was that right after my doctor left the room and I promised my dad and my sisters, I'm going to dedicate, and Caitlin, my now wife, then fiance, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to fighting back against this disease. And the next thing that I asked for was for my dad to come in the room, or my dad to get a hold of a buzzer, because I wanted him to buzz my head, because the chemotherapy was going to make my hair fall out. But I was done like being kind of the subject of this disease, where like chemo was going to make my hair fall out. I was like, you know what? I'm going to buzz my hair. I'm going to take my hair out before it can fall out from the chemo. So I'm doing it. I'm tired of being
I'm in control,
the subject of this disease. I'm in control. I'm going to be bald because I want to be bald, not because the chemo is going to make me bald. And at the time, it probably felt pretty inconsequential. And I'm sure my family was like, whatever you want to do, Dave. But I think that it really was symbolic of like a turning point, just as you said, Kyle. I'm taking this thing on.
Yeah.
David, I want to dig into that, the mantra, think it, do it, just a tiny bit. Can you give us an example of sorts, maybe one or two things, if it's not too personal, that you regretted? And you said, okay, if I have the opportunity, I'm gonna say it next time, or I'm gonna do it next time. What were a couple of those things?
So the first one that was really the most clear one for me was I dated a girl, Caitlin, for a couple years, and we broke up just a few months before I got sick. And when we broke up, I remember thinking to myself, like, if it's meant to be, it's going to happen, and we have all the time in the world. So, like, I'm not going to fight for this relationship, because I'm 25 years old. We've got all the time in the world to figure this out. And she wanted us to get back together, but I had this kind of mindset, like if it's going to work out, it'll work out. We have all the time in the world. And then there I was a couple months later dying in the ICU, and like, oh my gosh, we didn't have all the time in the world. And actually, wait, we don't. None of us have all the time in the world. And if we really want something to happen, we need to do it. We can't just wait and think it and like, oh yeah, I really care about her, and like, we can figure this out later on. So that was probably the biggest one for me at the time. But I do think that since that time, since I've kind of come up with that concept of think it, do it, I think Think It, Do It really did inspire me to want to take on Castleman disease, because it was like, I'm sitting there thinking like, oh, I wish my doctor or some doctor could figure this thing out. I hope, I pray that someone will do it. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I may not be able to do it, but I can try to do it. And like, I may not actually be successful, but like, at least I have control over whether I do something about it and whether I try to take this thing on. And so I think that it was a very clear kind of like hindsight reflection, but it also became this really important motto that inspired me to take this disease on.
Yeah, one of the sentences or comments in the book that really stuck out to me was, I was tired of praying. Like, I think we can all agree that hopes and prayers are essential, but nothing is going to happen because of hope. Hope can inspire action, right? As you say, but it can't cure a disease. Hope doesn't do anything unless there's action. And prayer doesn't do anything unless it inspires action as well. And so I really love that. I mean, you were still praying, and but you were like, all right, I'm tired of this. I need to actually do something.
Yes. Oh, absolutely, Kyle. And I think that the key here is, it's not to say that prayer isn't important. It's to say that prayer is so important that if it's worthy of you praying for it, then it is worthy of you acting for it. If it's something that you're gonna, if it's something that you're gonna take the time to pray for, and to really reflect on it, then that means that you really, really should act on it.
Yeah, I love that. Beautiful.
There's that sense of responsibility that everybody has to take, whether we're talking about a rare disease or a hope we might have for the homeless or some other ailment in the world or issue in the world. I don't know, that concept to me is so powerful, because like I said, if it's worth your efforts in prayer, then it has to be worth your efforts in your own energy, your own thought process, maybe your own resources, your own, like, get in there and get your hands dirty, right?
Yes, because basically, if not, you're praying that someone else will get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
And if it's important enough to you to pray for it, then it's important enough for you to act.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So, Dave, one of the things that stuck out to me in the book is, like, I always knew you as David Fajgenbaum. Yeah, you're an inspiring guy on stage and stuff, but you're also just like a friend off stage, and it's just Dave. Like, hey, it's this guy. But then, you know, it goes. You go through all the stuff you went through. Well, not all of it. Obviously, it was a shortened version. But I mean, dude, you are a freaking doctor, an MD, and you have, what, an MBA from Wharton, one of the best business schools in the world? And
which he completed in 8 months, I think it was, or some crazy, ridiculous, sped up process.
So my point.
I did.
Go ahead. I'll let you defend yourself here.
Like, you're a prodigy, whether you recognize it or not.
No, I will defend myself by saying that I have had such incredible supporters helping me to make it through all of that school, and I'm so grateful that I did so much of that school, because it prepared me for taking on this disease, but it also connected me with some of the most incredible people. I know you guys have heard me say this before, and I stick to it, and that's that people often talk about, like, it takes a village to, like, make progress. I always say it takes an army, and that, like, if it was just me on my own, no matter how many degrees I have, I could have made very little progress. But because of all these amazing people, we've been able to make a ton of progress.
So the thing I really liked, there was a page in the book that talked about the fact that, you felt like maybe there wasn't as much not respect, but like weight given to your actions because you were also a patient. Like, maybe it's a conflict of interest or something like that, because you're a patient, but you're also a scientist, and maybe you were going to cut corners or whatever because you're too emotionally involved in all that. So can you talk about that issue a little bit? I feel like that's a little obscure, but it's huge, right?
It is. I think it's really important, and that's that in science, we are trained to be objective investigators, and that it's important for us not to have any sort of skin in the game or any sort of bias one way or the other, to basically let the data do the talking. And so I was really worried early on when I was doing Castleman's research that other scientists would maybe discredit my work or would not want to work with me because if they found out that I also was a patient. And I think that it really does highlight, because it actually did start to happen as I started to disclose that I was a patient. One, I was invited to give a talk, and when they found out I was a patient, they actually asked me to redirect my talk, not about research, but about patient advocacy. And patient advocacy is extremely important, but I could talk about both. I could talk about advocacy and research, but once they found out I was a patient, they wanted me to focus on advocacy. And so I think that it highlights in our system that, yes, scientists need to be objective, and we do need to truly not have skin in the game. However, what I really argue in the book is that the fact that I have Castleman disease doesn't make me cut corners. If anything, it makes me check the results like over and over and over and over again, because I have the disease and people I love have the disease. Friends that I've made through this journey that have this disease, that makes me be even more rigorous than I think maybe if I didn't have the disease, because in science we always go for statistical significance. We go for a p-value that's less than 0.05. So if we do an experiment, there's less than a 5% chance that result would have just happened by random chance. That's kind of the gold standard for research. And when we achieve statistical significance, we as a medical community community have agreed that that means it's worthy of publication. Or if it doesn't achieve statistical significance, you can publish it, but you found that it wasn't significant. And now what I argue is that when you have the disease, statistical significance doesn't really matter anymore. I mean, you want, obviously, to demonstrate things rigorously, but all of a sudden, it's not just about meeting the threshold for being able to publish a paper. It's now like meeting the threshold to have an impact on a patient's life. And I shouldn't come across saying that if you don't have a disease that you're not going to care. And I don't want to communicate that at all, because there are so many incredible physicians and scientists who care so much and pour their hearts into research. But I guess my point is to say is that because I have the disease, if anything, it makes me more rigorous, and it doesn't make me, want to cut corners. And actually, I should say that as I began sharing my story, though there were a couple blips in the road of collaborators maybe treating me a little bit differently, I have been really pleasantly surprised and thankful that so many people have gotten behind the work that we're doing and have treated me fairly.
I think you make a really strong point. Like, if you're living with the condition as a scientist, again, not to discredit other phenomenal scientists and researchers in the world, but if you're living with it, like when you go home at night, you're not leaving it in the lab. Like
you're right.
You eat and breathe and sleep 24/7. That thing. So I love that you point that out. Like, obviously, it's going to make you a little more rigorous and focused and paying attention to all the details and not just what might look good on paper or a statistical significant factor. That's powerful.
Yes.
So this line of discussion brings me to Rob Long. Rob stood up when you gave your talk at Global Genes. Rob stood up and he talked about a conversation that you guys had. By the way, for our listeners, we interviewed Rob Long in episode 70, so check that out. But so Rob stood up. He said the first time he met you, he's like how he's looking at you going, all right, this guy is so accomplished. He's an MD. He's got all these degrees, and he's going to cure his own disease because he knows what to look for through a microscope. And Rob goes, what should I, because he was diagnosed with the rare brain cancer. And he goes,
that's right.
Maybe I should go back to medical school or go back to school and figure out what I need to do to combat this disease. And I think the conversation led to something like, no, you don't need to be a doctor. Like, we need everyone.
Yep.
There are plenty of things that Rob Long can do that David Fajgenbaum can't do. And
exactly
that goes for everyone in the rare disease community, and we need everyone to get it done. So can you talk about that a little bit and how you mentor others?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that probably the greatest example of, or maybe one of the ways to explain just how, not only am I saying it, but I really believe it, was that after medical school, I decided to do business school because I was like, oh my gosh, as a medical student and as a doctor, you're not trained on how to organize people. You're not trained on how to raise money and collect samples and use data efficiently and funding efficiently. These are things that people in the business world actually have so much more experience. So I went to business school for it. But the point is that, like, we all have specific areas that we're good at. And but if we all wait and believe that someone else is going to take it on or someone else can do it, then, none of us are going to make progress. And so, looking at someone like Rob and what he's already been able to do in this fight the last several years is just amazing. So he's coming at this disease, or at rare diseases generally, from the awareness raising, the fundraising angle, but thinking about how do you connect organizations with foundations, with researchers in the right way. And these are things that doctors we're not trained to do. And we as patients can't really expect our doctors and researchers to mobilize communities and to raise money and awareness, because that's just not what we're trained to do. But we as patients can use our skills to do all those things. And so, I mean, both of you guys are great examples of what you guys have done for Friedreich's ataxia. There's so much to be done, that there are so many important things that every one of us can bring to the table, and we just have to, it's just this. We've talked about it a couple of times during the show, but really the way that I piece it together into one phrase, I think, is just turning hope into action. If any of us are hoping for something to happen, we need to take action, and all of us have the skill sets needed to take important action for our diseases.
We always love talking to Dr. David Fajgenbaum. In fact, this time we talked to him for an hour. We have the rest of that interview in episode 92. Also, judging from all the comments on his Instagram feed, I know you're all concerned about Sean. So the next episode may include a brief overview of what the heck happened and a few details about his time in physical rehab here in Pennsylvania. Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisableddudes.com and please subscribe on the iTunes. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins.
Until next time, keep living with urgency.